Storytime, Storytyd, ixesha yebali. To celebrate Mandela Day 2020, the Eastern Cape branch of the Literacy Association of South Africa has put together 67 minutes of stories, narrated by our committee members, teachers and parents. We have 13 stories, 9 in English, 3 in Afrikaans, and 1 in ixesha. In the words of Nelson Mandela, when we read, we are able to travel to many places, meet many people, and understand the world. We hope you enjoyed listening
to reading
to
of
these
Temor and the Plant Thieves, adapted from the original written by ixesha and read by Gwen Ortner. Temor was a clever young girl who lived in the village of Hunu. She loved going to school and learning new things. One day at school, her class learnt about planting and growing vegetables. Temor was so fascinated by this idea that she couldn't wait to get home and tell her parents about it. Bring! The last school bell of the day rang, and all the children rushed out of their classrooms to make their way home. When Temor arrived home, her mother and father were in the kitchen having tea. "Hello, Mama. Hello, Papa," she said as she walked into the kitchen. "Hello, Temor," answered her parents. "How was your day at school today?" asked her mother. "It was good. I learned something very interesting," replied Temor, excitedly while making her way to her bedroom. Temor's parents wondered what their daughter was talking about, but before they could ask her to explain, she had disappeared. In her bedroom, Temor took off her school uniform and put on her other clothes, but these were not her everyday other clothes. She put on her overalls, gumboots, and a hat. Temor walked back into the kitchen. "Ta-da! Mama and Papa, look!" she said. Her parents were very surprised. Temor never wanted to do any chores at home, so why was she suddenly dressed in work clothes? "Why are you dressed like that, Temor?" her father asked. "Because I want to start growing my own vegetables, Papa," she said excitedly. "So you want to have your own garden here at home?" her mother asked. "Yes, Mama," Temor replied. Temor's parents looked at each other and wondered how Temor would manage to take care of a garden when she complained about chores as simple as making them tea. But they decided to have faith in her anyway. So Temor and her father went outside and chose a piece of land in their yard where Temor could start her garden. Then Temor's father went inside to change into his overalls. First, Temor and her father used a garden fork to break up the ground they had chosen. This helped them make soft soil for planting seeds. It also helped loosen unwanted weeds and stones under the soil. Next, they raked all the unwanted weeds and stones from the soil. Temor and her father put all the weeds into a corner of the garden and made a compost heap. The next day, when Temor came back from school, she quickly changed out of her school uniform and went into her garden with her father. Her father had bought some seeds for them to plant. So they planted and planted. They planted spinach, carrots, tomato, and bean seeds. Then Temor wanted to water the soil to help the seeds grow. Every day after that, Temor was excited to come home from school and water her garden. But there was a little problem. While no one was looking, the animals were starting to eat Temor's vegetable plants. One day when she came home from school, Temor found the goats feeding in her garden. She chased them away and ran into the house. "Mama, Papa, the goats are eating my vegetable plants. Why didn't you watch out for them?" she said, crying. "Sorry, Temor," apologized her father. Mama and I were taking a nap. Let's go outside and see what we can do. So they went into the garden. What a mess the goats had made! But at least only a small part of the garden had been damaged. Let's build a fence around the garden, Papa, Temo suggested. That's a good idea, Papa replied. So Temo and her father built a fence around the garden so the goats could no longer get in. The next day, when she came home from school, Temo found the cows eating her plants. The cows had been clever enough to open the garden gate with their horns. Temo tried to chase the cows away, but it only took one cow with large, sharp horns to look at her, and she was terrified. The cows looked so big. She ran into the house. "Mama, Papa, this time the cows are eating my vegetable plants," she said. Temo and her father went outside and found the cows grazing in Temo's garden. Her father chased them away. "Papa, why don't we try to lock the gate with some wire?" Temo suggested. "That way the cows won't be able to open the gate again." Her father thought that was a good idea, so he made a catch out of some wire which went over the pole of the fence. The next day, when Temo came back from school, she found not the goats, not the cows, but the birds eating the plants in her garden. She chased them away and ran to tell her parents. "Mama, Papa, now the birds are eating my vegetable plants," she cried. Temo's father went outside with her to see what the problem was. "I don't know what to do now, Temo," said her father, scratching his head as he thought very hard. "I know what we can do," said Temo quickly. "What about we put a net over the garden? Then the birds won't be able to get the plants." And Temo was right. Her father put some old wire over the small seedlings, and they never had to worry about any animals eating the plants in her garden again. No goats could get in, no cows could get in, and no birds could get in either. The plants in her garden grew, and soon the vegetables were ready for picking. Temo's mother cooked a tasty soup of beans, carrots, spinach, and tomatoes, and they all enjoyed a meal that had come from Temo's
Die
garden.
kameelperd en die jakkals. Lank gelede was daar 'n kameelperd en 'n bakoor jakkals wat baie goeie vriende was. Hulle was albei baie goed met steel en het saam baie kattekwaad aangevang. Op 'n dag voel jakkals honger. "Kom ou maat," sê hy vir kameelperd. "Kom ons steek die rivier oor en gaan steel kos op die plaas daar oorkant." "Blink plan," sê die kameelperd en lik sy lippe af. "Ek's lus vir 'n sappige waterlemoen." Die kameelperd en die jakkals steek toe die rivier oor. Die jakkals hou styf aan die kameelperd se lang nek vas, want hy kan nie swem nie. Aan die ander kant van die rivier maak die slim jakkals met sy skerp tande 'n gat in die boer se draadheining. Toe wrimmel die jakkals en die kameelperd stilletjies deur die gat in die draadheining om kos aan die ander kant te gaan steel. Die jakkals steel 5 eiers uit die hoenderhok en die kameelperd eet 'n lappie blaarslaai op. Hy wil net aan 'n sappige waterlemoen begin eet, toe die jakkals sy snoet lig en begin chunk. Woe! "Shh," sis die kameelperd en spoeg stukkies waterlemoen oor die jakkals uit. "Wat bedoel jy, shh?" vra die jakkals en vee sy snorbaarde af. "Ek sing altyd wanneer ek klaar geëet het. Dis my manier van doen." "Wel, wag totdat ek my waterlemoen klaar geëet het," sê die kameelperd al knarsende. "Anders gaan die boer jou hoor en ons kom wegjaag." Die jakkals is moeg gewag. Hy lig weer sy snoet en begin sing. "Awoe!" Die boer is besig om middagete te eet toe hy die jakkals hoor chunk. Hy hardloop buitentoe met sy groot stok. Die jakkals sien hom aankom en omdat hy baie vinnig is, skiet hy deur die gat in die heining en 'n skoonveld voor die boer hom kan sien. Die arme kameelperd staan egter met sy voorpote wyd uitmekaar en probeer die laaste stukkie van sy waterlemoen geniet. Toe hy die boer sien aankom, probeer hy opstaan en weghardloop, maar sy bene raak ineengestrengel en hy val om. "Moet nooit ooit weer van my steel nie," skree die boer en slaan die kameelperd met sy stok. Toe die kameelperd uiteindelik ontsnap, is sy hele lyf vol kneusplekke en hy is woedend kwaad vir die jakkals. Hy hink tot by die rivier, waar die jakkals onder 'n bos lê en slaap. "En jy noem jouself 'n vriend," skree die kameelperd en maak die jakkals wakker. "Dis oor jou gesingery dat ek pimpel en pers geslaan is." "Moenie kwaad wees nie," sê die jakkals. "Ek het jou gesê ek sing altyd wanneer ek klaar geëet het. Kom ons steek nou die rivier oor en gaan huis toe." Die jakkals hou aan die kameelperd se nek vas en die kameelperd swem die rivier in. Toe die kameelperd by die diepste deel van die rivier kom, sê hy vir die jakkals: "Ek gaan nou bad. Ek voel warm en sweterig na daardie pak sla." "Jy kan nie," sê die jakkals en staar met uitpeel oë na die kameelperd. "As jy onder die water ingaan, sal ek verdrink. Ek kan nie swem nie." "Maar ek moet bad," sê die kameelperd. "Dis my manier van doen." En daarmee duik die kameelperd onder die water in. Die jakkals spat en spartel om kop bo water te hou. "Help, help, ek verdrink," skree die jakkals. Die kameelperd is kwaad oor sy pak sla, maar dit voel aaklig om die jakkals so in die water te sien rondspartel. Die jakkals is daarom tog sy vriend. Die kameelperd druk sy kop onder die water in en gebruik dit om die jakkals tot op sy nek te lig. Die jakkals hoes en proes en klou met alle mag en geweld aan die kameelperd vas. Toe hulle aan die ander kant van die rivier kom, dink die jakkals oor dit wat hy aan sy vriend gedoen het. "Kameelperd," sê hy sag. "Ja, jakkals," antwoord die kameelperd. "Ek is jammer dat ek jou so sleg behandel het. Ek besef nou dat dit wat jy aan my gedoen het, was oor ek jou vroeër so sleg behandel het," sê jakkals. Kameelperd knik. "Dit was," sê hy. "Ek het jou terugbetaal vir wat jy aan my gedoen het." "Jammer," sê die jakkals. En so het die jakkals en die kameelperd geleer dat dit belangrik is om ander te behandel soos jy behandel wil word. En van daardie dag af het hulle dit altyd gedoen en tot vandag toe is hulle steeds
How to
beste
be
vriende.
a superhero. Timo lived in a small village surrounded by mountains, green fields, and beautiful forests. But his favorite place was the park. He loved it there because he felt like a superhero when he ran around, climbed on the jungle gym, and spun on the merry-go-round. Every day, when Timo came home from school, he would get changed out of his school uniform and eat the delicious sandwich that his grandmother had made for him. Then he would do his homework, and when it was done, he would rush outside shouting, "Granny, Granny, it's playtime." And Granny would call after him, "Timo, wait. Don't you want me to read you a story?" "No, Granny, I need to play and explore," Timo would reply, already on his way to meet his friends who were waiting for him at the gate. "There are many places that you can explore in storybooks, Timo," Granny would say. "Books can teach you lots of things and take you to places that you have never been." Timo would giggle and say, "Granny, books can't take me anywhere. Only cars can do that." Then he would run off down the road to the park with his friends. One afternoon, Timo's best friend, Ben, was waiting for him at the gate. "Hey, Timo, are you ready to play?" asked Ben. "I'm always ready," said Timo, racing down the street with his best friend. They both wanted to get to the park first. When they got there, Timo's other friends were waiting for them. Pamela was sitting on the swing crying, while Norma and Sia were standing next to her. They looked worried. Timo moved closer to find out what was going on. "What happened to Pamela?" he asked. "She was on the swing, and Sia accidentally pushed it too hard. Pamela fell off the swing, and now her knee is bleeding," explained Norma. "Oh no! What are we going to do?" asked Ben. It's okay. I know what to do, said Norma, reaching for her backpack and taking out a small bag. What is that? Asked Timo. It's a first aid kit. I will clean Pamela's knee and then put on this plaster so that it feels better, said Norma. The friends were surprised that Norma knew exactly what to do. Once the plaster was on, Pamela said she felt much better and she wanted to play again. All the friends felt happy and relieved, and they thanked Norma. All the friends raced over to the jungle gym, except Timo. He was wondering how Norma had known what to do. He wanted to know where you could learn these kinds of things, because superheroes are supposed to know how to help people. Timo walked over to where Norma was climbing and asked, Norma, how did you know what to do? Norma smiled and said, I read it in a storybook. You learned all of that from reading a storybook? Asked Timo. He wasn't sure he could believe what Norma had said. Yes, Timo, I want to be a doctor when I grow up so that I can help people. When I read storybooks, I learn about how doctors help people, said Norma. Timo was amazed. I want to be a superhero and help people too. Do you think storybooks could help me do that? He asked. Yes, of course, said Norma. Storybooks can teach you lots of things. Just get them from the library and start reading. The next day, when he got home from school, Timo changed out of his school uniform and ate the delicious sandwich that his grandmother had made for him. Then he did his homework. He had just finished when Granny called him. Timo, your friends are here. They are waiting for you to go to the park with them. Please tell them I will join them later, Granny, asked Timo. Granny could not believe her ears. Timo was always in a hurry to go to the park. Why aren't you going right now? She asked. I'd like you to read me a story before I go, please, said Timo. Granny smiled happily. That's new. Why do you want me to read you a story today? She asked. Because Norma says stories can teach me how to be a superhero and help my friends, Timo said as he jumped up and down excitedly. That's my boy, said Granny as she picked up a storybook. So Granny and Timo sat down together and read that storybook, and another, and another. And every afternoon after that, before Timo went to play in the park, he asked Granny to read to him.
Vakansies by Oma, by Fanny Viljoen en Catherine Groenewald. Udongo en Apio woon in die stad by hulle pa. Hulle sien uit na die vakansie. Nie net omdat die skool sluit nie, maar omdat hulle weer by hulle ouma gaan kuier. Sy bly in 'n vissersdorpie naby in 'n groot meer. Udongo en Apio is opgewonde omdat dit weer tyd is om by haar te gaan kuier. Die aand voor hulle vertrek, pak hulle hul tasse en maak gereed vir die reis na die dorpie. Hulle kan nie slaap nie en praat die hele nag oor die vakansie. Vroeg die volgende oggend vertrek hulle in hul pa se kar. Hulle ry verby berge, wilde diere en teeplantasies. Hulle tel karre en sing liedjies. Na 'n ruk is die kinders moeg en raak aan die slaap. Pa maak vir Udongo en Apia wakker toe hulle in die dorpie aankom. Hulle kry hul ouma waar sy op 'n mat onder 'n boom rus. Ouma se naam beteken dogter van die mense. Sy is 'n sterk en mooi vrou. Ouma verwelkom hulle en dans in die kamer rond van blydskap. Haar kleinkinders is angstig om die geskenke wat hulle saamgebring het vir haar te gee. Maak my geskenk eers oop, sê Odongo. Nee, my geskenk eers, sê Apio. Nadat ouma die geskenke oopgemaak het, seën sy haar kleinkinders op die tradisionele manier. Daarna gaan speel Odongo en Apia buite. Hulle jaag skoenlappers en voëls. Hulle klim bome en swem in die meer. Toe dit donker word, gaan hulle terug huis toe vir aandete. Voordat hulle nog kan klaar eet, raak hulle aan die slaap. Die volgende dag ry die kinders se pa terug stad toe. Hy los die kinders by ouma. Odongo en Apio help hulle ouma met huiswerk. Hulle gaan haal water en vuur maak hout. Hulle gaan haar eiers uit by die hondes en pluk groente in die tuin. Ouma leer haar kinders hoe om sagte deegkoekies te maak. Sy wys hulle hoe om kokosneutruis saam met vis te eet. Een oggend neem Odongo sy ouma se koeie na die weiveld. Hulle hardloop na die buurman se plaas toe. Die boer is baie kwaad vir Odongo. Hy dreig om die koeie vir homself te hou, omdat hulle sy oes eet. Na daardie dag maak die seun seker dat die koeie nie weer in die moeilikheid kom nie. Op 'n ander dag gaan die kinders saam met hul ouma na die mark toe. Sy het 'n stalletjie waar sy groente, suiker en seep verkoop. Apio vertel graag vir die kliënte wat die artikels kos. Odongo verpak dan die goed wat die mense koop. Teen die einde van die dag drink hulle saam tee. Hulle help hul ouma om die geld wat sy verdien het te tel. Maar gou is die vakansie verby en die kinders moet teruggaan stad toe. Ouma gee vir Odongo 'n keps en vir Apia 'n trui. Sy pak kos vir die reis. Toe hulle pa hulle kom haal, wil hulle nie weggaan nie. Die kinders smeek vir ouma om saam stad toe te gaan. Sy glimlag net en sê, ek is te oud vir die stad. Ek sal vir julle wag, totdat julle weer in my dorpie kom kuier. Odongo en Apio gee haar 'n stywe drukkie en sê totsiens. Terug by die skool vertel Odongo en Apia vir al hulle vriende van die lewe in die dorpie. Party kinders dink die lewe in die stad is goed. Ander dink die lewe in die dorpie is beter. Maar almal stem saam dat Odongo en Apio 'n wonderlike
From
ouma
I Am Number 4 by Pittacus Lore. Pittacus Lore is a Lorien elder who was entrusted with the story of the Lorien Nine. His whereabouts are unknown. The door starts shaking. It's a flimsy thing made of bamboo shoots held together with tattered lengths of twine. The shake is subtle and stops almost immediately. They lift their heads to listen. A 14-year-old boy and a 50-year-old man who everyone thinks is his father, but who was born near a different jungle on a different planet hundreds of light years away. They are lying shirtless on opposite sides of the hut, a mosquito net over each cot. They hear a distant crash, like the sound of an animal breaking the branch of a tree. But in this case, it sounds like the entire tree has been broken. What was that? The boy asks. Shh, the man replies. They hear the chirp of insects, nothing more. The man brings his legs over the side of the cot when the shake starts again. A longer, firmer shake and another crash, this time closer. The man gets to his feet and walks slowly to the door. Silence. The man takes a deep breath as he inches his hand to the latch. The boy sits up. "No," the man whispers, and in that instant, the blade of a sword, long and gleaming, made of a shining white metal that is not found on earth, comes through the door and sinks deeply into the man's chest. It protrudes 6 inches out through his back and is quickly pulled free. The man grunts. The boy gasps. The man takes a single breath and utters one word. "Run!" He falls lifeless to the floor. The boy leaps from the cot, bursts through the rear wall. He doesn't bother with a door or a window. He literally runs through the wall, which breaks apart as if it's paper, though it's made of strong, hard African mahogany. He tears into the Congo night, leaps over trees, sprints at a speed somewhere around 60 miles per hour. His sight and hearing are beyond human. He dodges trees, rips through snarled vines, leaps small streams with a single steps. Heavy footsteps are close behind him, getting closer every second. His pursuers also have gifts, and they have something with them, something he has only heard hints of, something he never believed he would see on earth. The crashing nears. The boy hears a low, intense roar. He knows whatever is behind him is picking up speed. He sees a break in the jungle up ahead. When he reaches it, he sees a huge ravine, 300 feet across and 300 feet down, with a river at the bottom. The river's bank is covered with huge boulders that would break him apart if he fell on them. His only chance is to get across the ravine. He'll have a short running start and one chance to save his own life. Even for him or for any of the others on earth like him, it's a near impossible leap. Going back or going down or trying to fight them means certain death. He has one shot. There's a deafening roar behind him. They're 20, 30 feet away. He takes 5 steps back and runs. And just before the ledge, he takes off and starts flying across the ravine. He's in the air 3 or 4 seconds. He screams, his arm outstretched in front of him, waiting for either safety or the end. He hits the ground and tumbles forward, stopping at the base of a mammoth tree. He smiles. He can't believe he made it, that he's going to survive. Not wanting them to see him and knowing he needs to get further away from them, he stands. He'll have to keep running. He turns towards the jungle. As he does, a huge hand wraps itself around his throat. He is lifted off the ground. He struggles, kicks, tries to pull away, but knows it's futile, that it's over. He should have expected that they'd be on both sides, that once they found him, there would be no escape. The Mogadorian lifts him so that he can see the boy's chest, see the amulet that is hanging around his neck, the amulet that only he and his kind can wear. He tears it off and puts it somewhere inside his long black cloak he is wearing. And when his hand emerges, it is holding the gleaming white metal sword. The boy looks into the Mogadorian's deep, wide, emotionless black eyes, and he speaks. "The legacies live. They will find each other, and when they're ready, they're going to destroy you." The Mogadorian laughs a nasty, mocking laugh. It raises the sword, the only weapon in the universe that can break the charm that until today protected the boy and still protects the others. The blade ignites in a silver flame as it points to the sky, as if it's coming alive, sensing its mission and grimacing in anticipation. And as it falls, an arc of light, speeding through the blackness of the jungle, the boy still believes that some part of him will survive and some part of him will make it home. He closes his eyes just before the sword strikes, and then it is over. Chapter 1. In the beginning there were 9 of us. We left when we were young, almost too young to remember. Almost. I am told the ground shook, that the skies were full of light and explosions. We were in that 2-week period of the year when both moons hang on opposite sides of the horizon. It was a time of celebration, and the explosions were at first mistaken for fireworks. They were not. It was a warm A soft wind blew in from the water. I'm always told the weather. It was warm. I'm never sure why that matters. What I remember most vividly is the way my grandmother looked that day. She was frantic and sad. There were tears in her eyes. My grandfather stood just over her shoulder. I remember the way his glasses gathered the light from the sky. There were hugs. There were words said by each of them. I don't remember what they were. Nothing haunts me more. It took a year to get here. I was 5 when we arrived. We were to assimilate ourselves into the culture before returning to Lorien when it could again sustain life. The 9 of us had to scatter and go our own ways. For how long, nobody knew. We still don't. None of them know where I am, and I don't know where they are, or what they look like now. That is how we protect ourselves, because of the charm that was placed upon us when we left. A charm guaranteeing that we can only be killed in the order of our numbers, so as long as we stay apart. If we come together, then the charm is broken. When one of us is found and killed, a circular scar wraps around the right ankle of those still alive, and residing on our left ankle, formed when the Loric charm was first cast, is a small scar identical to the amulet each of us wears. The circular scars are another part of the charm, a warning system, so that we know where we stand with each other, and so that we know when they'll be coming for us next. The first scar came when I was 9 years old. It woke me from my sleep, burning itself into my flesh. We were living in Arizona, in a small border town near Mexico. I woke screaming in the middle of the night in agony, terrified as the scar seared itself into my flesh. It was the first sign that the Mogadorians had finally found us on Earth, and the first sign that we were in danger. Until the scar showed up, I had almost convinced myself that my memories were wrong, that what Henri had told me was wrong. I wanted to be a normal kid, living a normal life. But I knew then, beyond any doubt or discussion, that I wasn't. We moved to Minnesota the next day. The second scar came when I was 12. I was in school in Colorado, participating in a spelling bee. As soon as the pain started, I knew what was happening, what had happened to number 2. The pain was excruciating, but bearable this time. I would have stayed on the stage, but the heat lit my sock on fire. The teacher who was conducting the bee sprayed me with a fire extinguisher and rushed me to the hospital. The doctor in the ER found the first scar and called the police. When Henri showed, they threatened to arrest him for child abuse. But because he hadn't been anywhere near me when the second scar came, they had to let him go. We got in the car and drove away, this time to Maine. We left everything we had except for the Loric chest that Henri brought along on every move. The third scar appeared an hour ago. I was sitting on a boat, my foot trailing in the water when the scar appeared. So now I knew they had found number 3. I got home to Henri as fast as I could. In the beginning we were a group of 9. 3 are gone, dead. There are 6 of us left. They are hunting us, and they won't stop until they've killed us all. I am number 4. I know that I am next.
Molo sele, igama lam ndinguzinzi, kushushu, ndisele ne-emele yam. Abasebenzi bafuna ukusela amanzi. Abasebenzi badiniwe, basebenza kanzima, kushushu. Abasebenzi bafuna ukusela amanzi. Uphi uzinzi? Bayabuza. Molo Ivona, igama lam nguzinzi. Kushushu kakhulu. Ndize ne-email yam. Abasebenzi bafuna ukusela amanzi. Abasebenzi badiniwe, basebenza kanzima, kushushu kakhulu. Abasebenzi bafuna ukusela amanzi. Uphi uzinzi? Bayabuza. Molo qilish, igama lam nguzinzi, kushushu kakhulu, kakhulu. Ndize ne-email yam, abasebenzi bafuna ukusela amanzi. Abasebenzi badiniwe, basebenza kanzima, kushushu kakhulu, kakhulu. Abasebenzi bafuna ukusela amanzi. Uphi uzinzi bayabuza. Wade wafika uzinzi, bade bafuna amanzi. Shu bekushushu, ne-email ibenzima. Ibi ngubusebenzi uzima lo, hayibo zinzi.
This is a poem about a boy who was frightened at night and what he did about it. Being Brave at Night by Edgar Guest. The other night, about 2 o'clock, or maybe it was 3, an elephant with shining tusks came chasing after me. His trunk was waving in the air and spouting jets of steam, and he was out to eat me up. But still, I didn't scream or let him see I was scared. A better thought I had. I just escaped from where I was and crawled in bed with Dad. I ain't scared of nothing that comes pestering me at night. Once I was chased by 40 ghosts, all shimmery and white. And I just raced them round the room and let them think maybe I'd have to stop and rest a while when they could capture me. Then, when they leapt onto my bed, oh gee, were they mad to find I had slipped away and crawled in bed with Dad. No giants, ghosts, or elephants have dared to come in there, 'cause if they did, he'd beat them up and chase them into their lair. They just hang around children's rooms and snap and snarl and bite and laugh if they can make them yell for help with all their might. But I don't ever yell out loud. I'm not that sort of lad. I slip out from the covers and crawl in bed with Dad.
'n Dag om te onthou. Storie de narrated trok, vertaal deur Anita van Zyl. Maak gou nou, ons het nie baie tyd nie, sê Hope en sit haar swaar sak neer. Hope en Josh wag vir Neo. Hulle is almal op pad park toe, as deel van Hope se plan. Hope het 'n plan begin beraam nadat sy die nuwe boek gelees het wat haar ma vir haar gekoop het. Dit gaan oor 'n meisie wat dapper haar dorpie van 'n vreesaanjaende monster red. Hope het die boek so baie geniet dat sy dit binne 'n dag klaar gelees het en selfs daardie nag van die vreesaanjaende monster gedroom het. Ek hoop net jou plan gaan pret wees. Hoekom is jy so haastig? Vra Neo vir Hope toe hy die voordeur toetrek. Neo het sy gunsteling seerowehoed op en dra ook 'n oogklap. Ek weet net so min soos jy, Neo. Hope het my net gevra om my vleer saam te bring park toe, sê Josh en beduie na sy vleer. Vertrou my, julle gaan dit geniet, sê Hope terwyl sy voor haar maats uitstap. Neo en Josh volg haar en probeer bybly. Toe hulle by die park kom, sien hulle die burgemeester met 'n groot skare mense om hom. Wat gaan aan? Vra Josh vir 'n vrou wat daar naby staan. Wel, die burgemeester het die afgelope maande baie klagtes ontvang, omdat daar nie genoeg skaduwee in die park is nie, sê sy. Daarom het hy baie nuwe bome laat aanplant, en vandag is hy hier om dit saam met almal te vier. Ag nee, die park is te vol vir my plan om te werk, sê Hope teleurgesteld. Watter plan? Vra Neo en Josh gelyk en kyk na mekaar. Onthou julle die storie wat ek gelees het van die dapper meisie wat haar dorp gered het? Vra Hope. Wel, ek het gehoop ons kan 'n vreesaanjaendste monster maak. Dit aan Josh se vleer vasbind en dit dan oor die park laat vlieg. Maar kyk nou, sê Hope en wys na die glimlaggende mense wat rondom die burgemeester staan. Neo sien hoe hartseer Hope is. Blink plan, Hope, sê hy. Kom ons gaan sit agter daardie groot bos. Niemand sal ons daar sien nie. Josh en Hope knik instemmend en kies goed soontoe. Josh, gaan soek jy 'n paar stokkies. Neo, haal jou seerowerhoed en oogklap af, gee Hope instruksies, terwyl sy haar karateklere en 'n ballon uit haar sak haal. Josh vind 'n paar dun stokkies langs 'n vullestrom. Die 3 maats gaan sit agter die bos en gebruik die tou uit Hope se sak om die stokkies in 'n kruisvorm aan mekaar vas te bind vir die monster se lyf. Toe blaas Hope die ballon op en bind dit daaraan vas vir die monster se kop. Hulle trek Hope se karateklere vir die monster aan en sit vir hom Neo se seerowerhoed en oogklap op. Josh maak die monster aan sy vleer vas en toe is hulle gereed. Die kinders kruip agter die bos weg en laat die vleer se tou afrol. 'n Sterk rukwind trek die monster hoog in die lug en op. Hoër en hoër vlieg dit op in die lug, al verre van hulle af weg. Intussen het Bella en haar ma by die park aangekom om met Noodle te gaan stap. Toe Noodle die monster in die lug sien hang, begin hy blaf en trek aan sy leiband. Bella probeer aan Noodle se leiband vashou, maar hy trek so hard dat sy moet laat los. Daar hardloop Noodle deur die park, met Bella en haar ma agterna. Toe sweef die monster stadig af tot reg bo die burgemeester se kop, terwyl hy nog besig is om sy toespraak te maak. Noodle hardloop steeds blaffend agter die monster aan, met Bella en haar ma op sy hakke. Josh trek aan die vleer se tou en probeer om die monster hoër in die lug te laat opvlieg, maar dit is te laat. Noodle spring in die lug op om die monster te gryp en stamp die burgemeester om. Stukkies papier met die burgemeester se toespraak daarop waai die park vol en mense begin in alle rigtings hardloop. Neo, Josh, Hope, Bella en haar ma kom vinnig nader om te help. Hulle vind die burgemeester op die grond langs die monster, met Noodle wat steeds daarvoor blaf. Die kinders help om Noodle stil te maak, terwyl Bella se ma die burgemeester ophelp. Toe verduidelik Hope haar plan en hoe dit skeef geloop het. Die burgemeester luister en toe Hope klaar is, kyk hy na haar en bars uit van die lag. Wel, nou kan jy jou eie storie oor 'n vreesaanjaende monster skryf, vertel die burgemeester voor. En selfs al het Hope se plan nie heeltemal uitgewerk nie, is dit 'n dag wat hulle almal sal onthou.
The Sad Peacock. A crow lived in the forest and was absolutely satisfied in life. But one day he saw a swan. This swan is so white, he thought, and I am so black. This swan must be the happiest bird in the world. He expressed his thoughts to the swan. Actually, the swan replied, I was feeling that I was the happiest bird around until I saw a parrot, which has 2 colors. I now think the parrot is the happiest bird in creation. The crow then approached the parrot. The parrot explained, I lived a very happy life until I saw a peacock. I have only 2 colors, but the peacock has multicolors. The crow then visited a peacock in the zoo and saw that hundreds of people had gathered to see him. After the people had left, the crow approached the peacock. Dear peacock, the crow said, you are so beautiful. every day thousands of people come to see you. When people see me, they immediately shoo me away. I think you are the happiest bird on this planet." The peacock replied, "I also thought I was the most beautiful and happiest bird on the planet. But because of my beauty, I am entrapped in this zoo. I have examined the zoo very carefully, and I've realized that the crow is the only bird not kept in a cage. So for the past few days, I have been thinking that I were a crow. I could happily roam everywhere." That's our problem too. We make unnecessary comparison with others and become sad. We don't value what God has given us. This all leads to the vicious cycle of unhappiness. Learn to be happy in what you have instead of looking at what you don't have. There will always be someone who will have more or less than you have. Person who is satisfied with what he or she has is the happiest person in the world. The end.
This is a poem by Renisha Jackson. She's a member of the Helen Vale Poets Society. Listen to the beautiful poem that she wrote. Vry op June 16de. Ek wil vry wees, want daar is baie goed wat in ons omgewing gebeur. Mense word siek en mense gaan dood. En niemand kyk agter hulle nie. Ek wil graag help, maar ek is jonk. Mense dink omdat kinders klein is, het ons nie 'n brein nie. Maar ons brein is varser as ou mense. Ek wil vry wees, soos 'n duif.
This story is
Maar ek
called
kan.
Funny Bones by Janet and Alan Alberg. This is how the story begins. On a dark, dark hill, there was a dark, dark town. In the dark, dark town, there was a dark, dark street. In the dark, dark street, there was a dark, dark house. In the dark, dark house, there was a dark, dark staircase. Down the dark, dark staircase, there was a dark, dark cellar. And in the dark, dark cellar, there was a big skeleton, a little skeleton, and a dog skeleton. One night, the big skeleton sat up in bed. He scratched his skull. "What shall we do tonight?" he said. "Let's take the dog for a walk," said the little skeleton, "and frighten somebody." "Good idea," the big skeleton said. So the big skeleton, the little skeleton, and the dog skeleton left the dark, dark cellar, climbed the dark, dark staircase, and stepped into the dark, dark street. They walked past the houses and the shops. They walked past the zoo and the police station. They went into the park. The big skeleton scratched his skull. "What shall we do now?" he said. "Let's play on the swings," said the little skeleton, "and throw a stick for the dog, and frighten somebody." "Good idea," the big skeleton said. So the big skeleton, the little skeleton, and the dog skeleton walked around the dark, dark pond, past the dark, dark tennis courts, and up to the dark, dark swings. The big skeleton and the little skeleton played on the swings. They threw a stick for the dog. Suddenly, something happened. The dog skeleton chased the stick, tripped over a park bench, bumped into a tree, woof, and ended up a little pile of bones. "Look at that," said the big skeleton. "He's all come to pieces. What shall we do now?" "Let's put him back together again," said the little skeleton. So the big skeleton and the little skeleton put the dog skeleton together again. They sang a song while they did it. The toe bone's connected to the foot bone's connected to the leg bone's connected to the hip bone, and the hip bone's connected to the backbone. Then they got all mixed up. Is that the toe bone? The little skeleton said. Where does this one go? Said the big skeleton. When they had finished, the big skeleton said, That dog looks a bit funny to me. So he does, said the little skeleton. We've got this tail on the wrong end, and his head. Woof, said the dog skeleton. At the last, the dog was properly put together again. The big skeleton and the little skeleton sang another song. These bones can bark again, can run around in the park again, can frighten people in the dark again. The big skeleton scratched his head. That reminds me, he said. We forgot to frighten somebody. Let's do it on the way home then, said the little skeleton. Good idea, the big skeleton said. So the big skeleton and the little skeleton and the dog skeleton left the dark, dark swings, went into the dark, dark town and tried to frighten somebody. The trouble was, there wasn't anybody. Everybody was in bed. Even the policemen in the police station were in bed. Even the animals in the zoo. Of course, the skeleton animals were awake. Let's have a ride on the elephant skeleton, said the little skeleton. Let's have a word with the parrot skeleton. The big skeleton scratched his skull. Let's keep out of the way of the crocodile skeleton, he said. When they were back in the street, and when they still could not find anybody to frighten, the big skeleton said, What shall we do now? The little skeleton scratched his skull. Let's frighten each other, he said. That's better than nothing. Good idea, the big skeleton said. So after the big skeleton frightened the little skeleton frightened the big skeleton. The big skeleton and the little skeleton frightened the dog skeleton, and the dog skeleton frightened them both. They hid around corners and frightened each other. They climbed up lampposts and frightened each other. They jumped out of dumpsters and frightened each other. All the way home. And that is how the story ends. On a dark, dark hill, there was a dark, dark town. In the dark, dark town, there was a dark, dark street. In the dark, dark street, there was a dark, dark house. In the dark, dark house, there was a dark, dark staircase. Down the dark, dark staircase, there was a dark, dark cellar. And in the dark, dark cellar, some skeletons lived. They still do. The end.
Making a Peace Poster. A poem by Caslin Rudolph, a member of the Helen Vale New Generation Poets. Making a peace poster. When you make a peace poster, you must have bright colors, cookies, and a big page. I decided to make a peace poster because the life outside here is very short. There are gangsters shooting guns and throwing stones. Not small stones, but big bricks. When they are shooting and throwing stones, they are not worried about people walking in the streets. You are shocked because it could be your brother or your sister lying there. It hurts when you hear of some of your people, that they are lying on the ground.
Mr. Hare
Dead.
meets Mr. Mandela by Chris van Wyk. Mr. Hare crept out of his forest home. The morning sky was blue, the grass was green, the trees swayed in the cool breeze. The forest was full of the songs of birds. But on his doorstep lay something he'd never seen before, a brand new 200 Rand note. Mr. Hare picked it up. What is Mr. Leopard doing here? He turned it around. Ah, Mr. Mandela, he cried. His left ear curled up and down as he thought. He looked up at Miss Secretary Bird, who was watching him from a branch in the tree. "Please call a meeting of all the animals," he said. "I have an important announcement to make." She flew off calling, "Meeting everyone at the baobab tree. This morning, meeting everyone." What is it this time? Everyone wondered, forming a circle under the tree. Mr. Hare stood in the center. He cleared his throat and began. "Fellow citizens of the forest, I have important news for you. This," he said as he waved the 200 Rand note around, "has landed on my doorstep. I don't know what it is or what it means, but it has Mr. Mandela's face on it, and so I'm sure it belongs to him." "It has my face on it too," said Mr. Leopard with a playful snarl. "So maybe it belongs to me." Everyone laughed, except for Mr. Hare. He was in no mood for jokes. "I plan to go to the city this very hour to return this important note to Mr. Mandela." "What?" Mr. Buffalo asked, shocked. "You will get lost there." "Why would I get lost?" asked Mr. Hare, pushing out his chest. "Because you can't read," said Mr. Rhino, pointing his sharp horn at Mr. Hare. "Oh, nonsense," snorted Mr. Hare. "It's true." Mrs. Elephant stomped her foot impatiently. "In the city of readers, almost everyone can read." "Well, what would happen to me?" Mr. Hare asked. Mr. Lion leapt forward, swishing his whiskers in Mr. Hare's face. "Those who cannot read repeat their mistakes over and over again," he growled. "And so will you." "Ha!" Mr. Hare sniggered. "Not me, Kitty." With those words, he marched fearlessly right underneath Mrs. Elephant. Then he skipped down the path that led to the city of readers. Soon he began to hear the noises of the city, and he saw it. He had never been in the city before. He glanced at Mr. Leopard's face on the note. It seemed to be warning him not to go. "But I am the little wise one," Mr. Hare said. "I am cleverer by far than anyone in the city of readers." And with a leap, he entered the city. The first people he saw were schoolgirls and boys. They looked smart in their blue and yellow uniforms. They carried school bags and books. "Good morning, Mr. Hare," they greeted him. "Hi there," Mr. Hare called back, proud that they knew him. But he was curious. "How do they know me?" he asked. "We've read about you in our storybooks," a girl said. "And how about Mr. Tortoise? And how Mr. Tortoise tricked you in a race?" They all laughed. Mr. Hare gave them an angry look and went on his way. He saw people rushing for a train and joined them. At the pay station, a man in a smart uniform, standing behind a counter, held out his hand, and Mr. Hare said, holding up the 200 Rand note, "I'm on my way to see Mr. Mandela." The man grabbed the note out of his paw. "Hey!" Mr. Hare protested. Then the man handed him a 100 Rand note. Mr. Hare examined the note on the train. "It turned blue," he said, puzzled. "And Mr. Buffalo has taken Mr. Leopard's place." He turned the note around. "But Mr. Mandela is still here." He took a carrot out of his pocket and nibbled happily, watching the scenery outside. "You see, Mr. Buffalo," he said to the 100 Rand note, "even though I can't read, I'm on my way to meet Mr. Mandela." "Excuse me, sir." Mr. Hare looked at a man in a blue uniform. "You are not allowed to eat on the train. Can't you read that?" He pointed to a sign above Mr. Hare's ears that read, "Please do not eat on the train." "Oh," Mr. Hare said, putting the half-eaten carrot back in his pocket. He got off at the next station and soon found himself on a busy street. Bratotsi watched Mr. Hare trying to cross the road and saw what he had in his paw. 100, he said, licking his lips. He walked up to Mr. Hare. You seem lost, my brother, he grinned. I'm Bratsotsi, here to help new visitors to our city. I'm Mr. Hare, he shook hands, and I'm on my way to see Mr. Mandela. Mr. Hare said, to give him this. He held out the banknote. Ah, said Bratsotsi, Mandela is my best friend. I'll take it to him. He grabbed the 100 rand and disappeared into the crowds. Mr. Hare was not happy about how things were going. He wanted to meet Mr. Mandela himself and shake his hand. But now all he could do was turn around and go back home. And what would he tell the animals about meeting Mr. Mandela? No, he decided. I must find Bratsotsi and take back the note. Quickly Mr. Hare weaved through the bustling crowds, leapt over moving cars, and darted in and out of shops. And there he is! Mr. Hare spotted Bratsotsi in my Piri's peri-peri chicken shop, chomping away on a 50 rand box of wild wigs. Hey, Bratsotsi, Mr. Hare said, give me back my note. Bratsotsi got such a fright that some peri-peri sauce got stuck in his throat, giving him a fit of hiccups. Here, hic, he said, handing over a 50 rand note. Pink? Mr. Hare held up the note, puzzled. And what happened to Mr. Buffalo? But here's Mr. Lion to tell me I need to read to survive in the city. Ha! He turned it around. But at least Mr. Mandela is still here. Mr. Hare saw people standing in a taxi queue. Behind them on the taxi shelter was a picture of Mr. Mandela. Ah, Mr. Hare said, they must all be going to visit Mr. Mandela too. He joined the queue, and when the taxi came, he got in. Where does Mr. Mandela live? He asked the driver. At the end of the long walk to freedom, my friend, he said with a friendly smile. I'll take you there. They rode for half an hour, past a school, street hawkers, down a highway, past a church, through a suburb, and finally the driver stopped at a taxi rank. You'll stop, my friend, said the driver. Just walk up this road until you get to a big house with a big gate with a guard outside the gate. That will be 30 rand. And he took the 50 rand note out of Mr. Hare's paw. Mr. Hare was about to protest when, your change, sir, the driver shoved a note in his paw. Mr. Hare looked at the note. Again, it was different to the last one. Instead of Mr. Lion, it was Mr. Elephant who stared at him. But when he turned it around, there was Mr. Mandela, still smiling. Mr. Hare smiled back and began to hop up the long road. On his way, he passed a bakery. He stopped, sniffed the air. What was that lovely smell? He pressed his face flat against the bakery window and gazed at the donuts, pancakes, pies, tarts, fruitcake, and biscuits. Mr. Hare hopped into the shop. Can I help you, sir? Said a lady behind the counter. I'd like one of these, he said, pointing to the donuts. No, one of those. He showed her a slice of milk tart, then a wedge of chocolate cake, a biscuit, apple crumble, and a cook sister. Please, sir, you have to make up your mind. Mr. Hare finally pointed to a Chelsea bun. Ah, the lady smiled. Good choice. He slipped the Chelsea bun into a packet and handed it to him. The next thing he knew, Mr. Mandela's brown note was in her hands. And when she put it back in his paw, it was green. And who do you think had taken the place of Mr. Elephant? There was Mr. Rhino, warning him about the city of readers. Mr. Hare skipped out of the shop, taking big bites of his Chelsea bun and wondering, how many times will Mr. Mandela's note change color before I meet him? Then he saw the guard at the big gate. He skipped up to the guard, greeted him, and asked, "Does Mr. Mandela live here?" "Yes, he does. I'm Mr. Hare of the African bush. I have an important note for him." The guard said, "Do you have an appointment?" "No," said Mr. Hare. "I have a note." The guard turned and spoke into an intercom. "Sir, I have a Mr. Hare from the forest." A deep chuckling voice crackled on the intercom. "Mr. Hare? The great Mr. Hare of the African forest?" "Yes, Mr. Mandela." "Well, send him in." It was a great meeting. The big hand of Mr. Mandela shaking the paw of the famous Mr. Hare. The two men entertained each other with stories of the city and the forest, of lions and heroes, of freedom and adventure. Then Mr. Hare told Mr. Mandela why he'd come. "I found this note on my doorstep," he said, handing over the 10 rand. "It has changed color so many times, and the faces of all my big friends from the forest have appeared on it. I knew it was yours, so I came to give it to you myself." Mr. Mandela was puzzled, but he accepted the note with a smile. A photographer came to take pictures of Mr. Mandela and Mr. Hare, and a TV crew came to film them for news at 6. When Mr. Hare came home, he called a meeting. He told all the animals about his exciting adventure. He told them about the people he'd met, the places he'd seen, and how he finally met Mr. Mandela. "And my friends," he said, looking smugly at lion and elephant and buffalo and leopard and rhino, "I did all of this without being able to read one word." And with that said, the sun set, and all the animals went back to their homes for a good night's rest. The next morning, Mr. Hare was awakened by a thud on his door. What was that? He wondered. Maybe it's the angry stomp of Mrs. Elephant coming to argue with me. He peeped outside. Mrs. Elephant wasn't there, but there was a big envelope on his mat. He went out and looked around to see who had brought it. There was no one in sight. Mr. Hare opened the envelope. It was a letter. "Dear Mr. Hare, the whole country is still talking about your visit. Thank you for telling me all of those stories and for returning the 10 rand note. I have enclosed a 200 rand note for you to spend the next time you visit the city. Warm regards, Nelson Mandela." Because he could not read, Mr. Hare was not interested in the letter, but something fell out of the envelope and fluttered onto the mat. Mr. Hare looked down at the 200 rand note. He could not believe his eyes. "I don't believe it," he cried, "on the very same place as yesterday morning." Without wasting time, he called another meeting of all the animals. "My friends," he announced, "it's a great mystery. The note has returned." He waved it around for all to see. "And I have to journey back to Mr. Mandela to return it to him." And without another word, he was away, skipping down the path that led to the city of readers, the note fluttering in his paw.